Okay, we are recording.
Okay.
Don't pay any attention to the video camera. What is today's date? It is the...
February 3rd, is it?
No, I think it's the... Is it the 3rd? That's the 4th. February 4th. February 4th, 2014. Okay, last time we got to... we got to when you left Detroit to go to Philadelphia when you were 1.5.
Well, yeah, I was older than that. Well, we were in Philadelphia until I was probably around 3.
Okay.
I'm guessing, but I imagine that was it.
Okay, and you lived in an apartment?
Yeah, we lived in an apartment.
4 floors up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
And we got to the part where you said that your dad was never around. Your life was always in turmoil. He was always drinking and speakeasies, and then you said you only had a few memories with your dad. One was sledding.
Yeah, that's when I was older and we lived in Fort Dodge.
Fort Dodge, Kansas?
Fort Dodge, Iowa.
Okay, so we're still
in between there, though. We moved to Buffalo.
When you were how old?
I was probably about 5. I was going into kindergarten. I remember that.
Okay.
That would create a time frame there.
Okay.
We had a home. It was in a nicer neighborhood. Mom got some furniture and a blue rug a sky blue rug that she was so proud of, or darker blue. That doesn't matter. These are just things that occurred to me. I'm just talking.
No, that's what I want you to do, Dad. Just talk the way it occurs to you.
Funny the things you remember as a kid. When he was doing all right, my father, that is, did I say this? His brother Harry had gotten him a job with a finance company. Okay, and I'd gone through all that, huh?
Just that his brother got him a job with a finance company.
Yeah,
Maybe that's what you started to say. In Buffalo? Was that?
Well, no, I think he started in Philadelphia.
Okay.
But he was bright and could have done most anything. He had, if I have a gift for gab, well, it's because of him, because he was. But he could be. He put on airs. He was never around home, yes. Yet, I'm not, the man, I can't be totally critical of him, but he could have gone places, I guess. He was tall. He was over 6 foot. He was good looking, red hair, with a temper to match. And, but he would only wear, I don't think the guy had a pair of work clothes in his life. At least until he retired, if you want to call it retired. At any rate, he always wore what was then the best of clothes. Hart Schaffner marks, suits, Florsheim or that quality shoes. He dressed to the nines, and he always wore a wide brim hat, a man's hat of that time, but he liked a wide brim. I believe more because he thought it gave him a sense of power with his height and his good looks, or what he considered his good looks. He did. He looked like a detective. You know, kept the brim down, it was kind of Oh, I want some facts, Mom. You know,
Yeah.
he working in the finance company, he was on collections. And I know this is supposed to be about me, but he told a bunch of that he liked to brag about stories of his adventures. He had to repossess cars. And moving back in time, this is a time when the mobs and gangsters and so forth were, well, I suppose they're still prevalent, but they were much more kind of out in the open and common. And I can remember one story where he had to go in and collect a payment from a gang member, mob member, who was at that time shot and had some phony doctor or dentist or something removing a bullet from his leg. He had to wait till surgery was over and ask him for dough, and he did. He could get away with this stuff. It was all bluff. One time they repossessed a car from a cop of some kind. This would be, I believe, in Buffalo, and the cop was terribly behind on his payments. He was a detective, and he told anybody if they came out and tried to collect from him, and he more or less threatened their life if they touched his automobile. And thereafter he became very cautious, so he parked the car under the kitchen window. So one night he was sitting there reading the paper in his kitchen, and my dad said he took along a kid from work, and he somehow jimmied the car open and pushed it for a block down the alley before they started it, and stole his car while he was sitting there with his shoulder holster still on or something like that. Anyway, we didn't, I can remember one of his favorite stories about me. He said that one night he and the friend he worked with got pretty well kicked out of shape. And so he brought the friend home with him. The guy slept on the couch, so they had to get up and go to a meeting the next morning. So they got themselves straightened around a little bit, and Mom and I were going with them. I don't know why. We were in the back seat of this company car that he had. And he said I was just a little guy, I'm standing in the seat, and I said, boy, oh boy, I don't know, something about I saw him drinking out of the bottle last night.
Oh,
And,
yes.
after they got home, they
Yeah.
came home with a bottle. And I said, it's not that funny, but he said, I said, boy, oh boy, Daddy, that is bad stuff. I said, one whiff of that'll make you drunk. How many gallons did you drink last night? And coming from a 4 or 5-year-old, why, he and this guy he thought that was very funny, but they kept a straight face because my mom wasn't too happy. Well, anyway, we moved to Buffalo. I remember starting kindergarten there, taking your little rugs so you could lay down. I guess they still do that today with rag rugs, I don't know. I couldn't learn to tie my shoes. I think I was probably the last one to finally pick it up. I couldn't get that through my head. These are just things that I remember.
You remember, that's just
What
so
I do
amazing.
remember is we were there in Buffalo, and I remember the weather. I remember the skies. It seemed like all winter long they were black. They weren't heavy or anything, they were just black. One day I was walking home from kindergarten and I saw a ray of sun come through, and I thought, wow, it's still up there. You know,
Yeah, you know how kids think, yeah.
Yeah. I can remember things at that age that are silly, like if we were in the car and I was always in the back seat, We didn't own a car, incidentally. But if I was in the car and we were driving and I was in the back seat, I thought the moon always followed us. I thought, well, what is it with the moon that it's always, trailing us? That's another thing.
One of my grandkids, I think it was Brittany, she thought the mountains were cardboard cut out when she was little. So.
But anyway, I'm trying to think of anything that, the snow. Whatever year we were there, and this would time frame that, was the year that the Honeymoon Bridge fell down over Niagara Falls. We spent, oh Lord, I don't know how many times, his relatives would come in to town. We took everybody to Niagara Falls, of course. And it was quite beautiful in the wintertime, the river and that, and the falls being. But anyway, so much ice. This was a bridge that went from, it was called the Honeymoon Bridge, ran from Canada to the American side. And it got so much ice on it, that it finally cratered a steel girded bridge.
Was anybody
Everybody knew
hurt?
it was going to go down for weeks, so they
Oh,
were
really?
all standing out there
Okay.
around watching it, because, the engineers had roped off the area and that, but there were people. I can remember we went out to look at it, and cold, oh gosh, that is one of the most miserable places in the United States. It has to be, as far as living there goes. But anyway, we went out, there were people standing down on the ice on the river, right? That in the summer is just, well, it's where the Maid of the Mist runs. In the summer it's open, and the tour boats and that are running.
Have you been back there since?
Yeah, we took, Angie was the first one to really graduate after 4 years of college. And I told her that I told her sometime before that, when she was smaller, if she would finish college, she would be number one. And I says, I'll take you on a trip. And so when she graduated, we flew back for graduation to Anderson, Anderson, Indiana, landing in Indianapolis. And her husband,
Jason,
big guy. Anyway, he borrowed his dad's car. I paid all expenses, or Mom and I did, and we drove up there and stayed for 3 or 4 days. Which is like, had her choose where she wanted to go around there. Of course, that was it. And we went on the Maid of the Mist, and we did the whole tourist shot. And I think they had a real good time. We did, I know. The only time that was scary was driving with Angie and Jason at the wheel. Because he wears out the top of the speedometer. And he will use anything to get through traffic. We came to an intersection that was all the cones were out because they were doing the highway, and it was raining. It was at night coming back. It was around Detroit or someplace up in there, and traffic's backed up for miles, but he just pulls off on the right shoulder and goes down like, oh Lord, one of those that always, bucks the line and gets in front. And I think he was still going around 60 or 70. And we get to the end, and there's this big blockade. It's an exit. That's what he took. He took an exit. He rode the shoulder, took an exit, and his point was he'd go up the entrance on the other side and get ahead of everybody, I guess. When we got down there wasn't any exit open. They were working on the other highway underneath as this overpass went over that we were on. And he just shot down that, knocked over probably a dozen cones, and up the other side. We went through it, and it was drivable, of course, but he just swerved around it, the big old barrels of whatever, full of sand or what have you. He wound his way through there and got on the other entry somehow.
Always looking for an adventure.
He's, they don't waste any time. And Angie, all the time he's driving, she doesn't have a seatbelt on, and she's got her back up against the dash talking to us in the back seat. You know, they'd have picked her up in pieces if he'd hit anything. Well, that's just another story. Anyway, getting back to the supposed Americana history.
Yeah.
All I remember is the snow. Somewhere, Mom, I suppose my sister has that photo now because she took the album, my half-sister Sue. But Mom had a picture of me standing, leaning on the light globe of the street light that the snowplow had plowed up that much on this, that I'm actually leaning.
Oh, on the street, like way up there, huh?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
that's
right.
interesting.
There's a glass street light on it, and I'm kind of standing there next to it or leaning on it. Mom and I were always, at that point, we never stayed one place to where and the friends that my dad had that he wanted to socialize with, I remember one of them was named the Spivies. My mom wasn't real crazy about because they're all big boozers, and the parties could get pretty wild. And I wasn't supposed to. Of course, I liked it. Like when they were playing poker, they'd have poker once, twice a week. Well, I'd be their bartender. I mean, I'd go get the beers for them, bring them in. Because they were in an ice box in another room. It wasn't like today. Anyway, I'd run in and get them beer, and they were playing Penny Ante, and well, you know, beyond that. But I mean, I'd get a few cents every bottle of beer I delivered. The only thing is, that's the first time I got high. Because they were enjoying themselves so much on the beer. And that was when you saved all the bottles and returned them. And there'd always be suds in them. And the suds would eventually condense down to a swallow of beer. So I thought, well, they're having so much, gaiety with this stuff. I'm gonna try it. So I went back and started.
And you were 5?
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Emptying all the bottles that I'd put back in the case. That by that time I had gone back to liquid from being foam. And everything then was an ice box, of course. Us kids used to jump on the truck in the summertime too. And the icemen they had to be, or they developed
Big.
into muscle men, because like when we were in Philadelphia, guy had he'd come up the stairs, there wasn't an elevator, he'd come to the stairs with 50 pounds of ice on his back, or what, And I mean, a whole apartment house there. Oh, incidentally, did I say that Mom used to make the Jell-O on the fire?
When we were in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
But you're in a house here in Buffalo, right?
Yeah.
So.
But anyway, in Buffalo, we had a fine life going. We were in a neighborhood that didn't have many kids. So one day I made friends. I started exploring the outside world. And I thought I'd just ride around on my trike till I found some kids to play with. Well, by the time I did, I was on a busy street. I don't know what it was, from out of the neighborhood, which wasn't far away. And I played all day with these kids. And when nighttime came, the mom just invited me in for supper with them. Can't remember or recall the conversations, of course, that took place. But while all this is going on, my folks are frantic that, this is during a time of the Lindbergh kidnapping and that. My folks are going crazy. I always was on my own. I wasn't watched closely. So I could find some of the darndest things. My mom, we were starting to live the good life. My mom bought me because I wanted one so bad, a Lindbergh helmet, a winter hat. It was sheep line and it had goggles like Lindbergh had when he flew his fair to St. Louis over the Atlantic. I was so proud of that cap. Well, after we moved out of that house and moved to another one. I know now that the reason we moved a lot wasn't my dad would usually stiff these people for the rent. He was always busted.
But he's just...
because of the lifestyle they led, the speakeasies and all that crap. So consequently we moved to, I think we lived 3 or 4 places in Buffalo. And
Well, let me back up. So when your parents were worried and you disappeared in a friend's house, they found you, or how'd that happen? How'd they find you?
Yeah, I lost track of time because the lights are in and they live in an apartment over Storer because it was a commercial area I was in. But they started, I don't know if they called the cops or not, but my dad started circling around and increasing the size of the circle as he went, since he wasn't having any luck. When he got to the outside perimeter, he saw my trike stuck beside a stairway that went upstairs from the store down below. And so he was just making inquiries and he was knocking on doors, and there I was. Now I will say about my dad, he saved me a few times from stuff like that. Now we're well beyond, but when I was 2, and I've told you this before, we used to go to Atlantic City a lot when we lived in Philadelphia. The boardwalk and the whole shot. And it was usually with Wishards. My grandparents would come out once a year in the summertime, and while they weren't watching, I was walking because I walked down and went into the surf, fascinated with the ocean. They're having a picnic.
Do you remember this?
And not vaguely I do, because I didn't have any fear of the water. And anyway, I walked out in, and I don't remember it really. I'm sure I just remember the story. And finally I got to where the tide was going out, and I got to where the waves knocked me down, or I slipped and fell, I guess. And supposedly when somebody looked around to see me while I was going out with the tide, somebody looked to see where I was at, and I was gone, and I would guess I was relaxed enough, I don't know, the salt content or what have you, but I didn't act particularly frightened, and I was, probably choked up a little bit, I don't know. Anyway, my dad, Frank Batten Wishard, he had run out on the dock, and guess what, he was at a picnic with a brand new Hartshafter and Marks suit and tie and new shoes on, or good shoes, and he had to jump in to pull me out. And everybody said he was so damn pissed because he ruined And that salt water and everything, he ruined his suit, and their thought he did. I hate to pick on him, I do. He's just a pitiful case. You know, somebody asked me about him, I say, well, he married my mom first, and then a couple years later he married the bottle. And the last marriage lasted a lot longer than the first, because he stayed married to it until he got cancer. He must have had a stomach of cast iron.
So when he found you, was he upset with you when he found you at the apartment?
I don't know, I
You
suppose.
don't remember?
Well, he was upset. But it didn't take much. He was the baby of the family, a redhead. The dear of, he was not only the baby, but just the one that my grandma made over so much. And he was a spoiled brat. And she was probably as much his problem as anything else, the way he was. Well, all the Wishards were hard partiers and drinkers.
Wonder where they picked all that up from. Because weren't their parents pretty straight-laced?
No, well, Mid, the woman that my dad married eventually after my mom divorced him, had a hard time. Mom had a hard time. They just advertised in papers and did the legal thing, because we hadn't seen him in years, nor did she know where he was at. But anyway, that's later on in life. And I make him sound terrible, and he was pretty bad. But other people, the people that he worked with and the people that he socialized with, thought he was, king of the realm, and he liked to be the joker. He was the idiot with the lampshade on his head at the parties and stuff like that, which of course I saw. I mean, I was around. They took me wherever they went. I didn't have a babysitter or anything like that.
Was Grandma, did she party, or was she?
No, not her. She was straight. She was a big woman. I think a homely woman. And she had red hair that went all the way to the ground.
You mean your grandfather,
Wishard.
right? And your grandfather was a partier too?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. Mid said he was an alcoholic.
Oh, okay.
I never smelled it on him or saw it, and I always liked the guy. He was. I spent a lot of time with him. He ran a little cigar store.
Right.
And I had a little place behind, in the back of the store. And my dad wasn't around, so I'd be making model airplanes and stuff like that back here. So he and I spent a lot of time together. He stayed slender. My grandmother was a big woman. My grandfather stayed slender and nice looking. I think you've seen pictures of him, I believe, and he had a bushy mustache. And I was named after him, of course. His name was William Ephraim Wishard. Ephraim coming from the Bible. And he was from the old Jewish, one of the 12 tribes. We're not Jewish. In fact, my dad was very racial in that regard. But I guess what I was going to say is, he was very loving to me, and he wasn't the loving type of guy. And I hated his kisses, because he would kiss me on the back of the neck sometimes when I was little and didn't expect it, and that mustache just sent shivers. But I thought he was a quiet man, and I thought he was pretty nice. But
And what was your grandmother's name?
Mary, her maiden name was Batten. That was my Batten. That's what. That was the middle name of my dad. And that's where it came from. They all came. You can check with Lisa and Teresa on history, but just prior to coming to the Des Moines area, they'd lived for years in Bloomfield, Iowa, south central Iowa. And their family down there had been pretty prominent. There was a guy by the name of Henry Wishard that I never knew. And when we passed through there with Teresa, it's like an old replica of a town. It's the town square.
Mm-hmm.
It was evidently the county seat and a beautiful courthouse that's been restored. And anyway,
In where?
Teresa was trying to take pictures of it. Mom and I were someplace else. And a guy stopped and he says, he saw she was trying to juggle some souvenirs and her camera and the whole works to take a picture. And he said, why not hold this man, an old man? Can I help you out, young lady? You know, that type of thing. So you can take your picture. And so she did. And he said, what are you doing here? Where'd you come from? She said, Colorado. I don't know how the conversation evolved. And he somehow got around to her name, and she said, yeah, my name before I got married was Wishard. Wishard? Oh, Henry Wishard. Are you related to Henry Wishard? And he was, you know, the stud duck of that mud pond. I mean, Henry was. They even had a theater. Did you know that?
Mm-hmm. Who was Henry? Was he your dad's uncle or what?
Yeah.
So
and
he
I
was
think
William's
he must have
brother?
financed or something, my grandfather. Because if you go down to Lisa's, you'll see a picture where he's in his harness shop. It says W.E. Wishard on the awning. And that was not a small harness shop for today. And it was loaded, the inventory in that place, just full of saddles, bridles, harnesses, all leather goods. And it shows my grandfather standing in front of his shop. We must have lost that. Anyway, I think Harry Wishard, my dad's brother, financed him, and Harry was the most successful of the four brothers. And I think he financed him to get him started in the tobacco store. And he was in the tobacco store up until the time I was 12, 13 years old.
And that was in which?
Des Moines. It was in Highland Park.
The other store was the saddle store. Where was it? Was it in Des Moines too?
I was in Bloomfield. So what I'm saying is they all gravitated from Broomfield up there. And according to Mid, there was a lot of wild stories about those ornery Wishard boys when they lived down there. I know nothing about it. Mid said my grandfather was married twice. That when they were in the Bloomfield cemetery looking at the Wishards and the Battens, that my grandfather disappeared. And Mid asked my grandmother, where is he? And he says, oh, he's over there at the gravestone of his first wife. I never knew that. I never knew that. But anyway, they were big wheels in a little tiny town of Bloomfield. And Henry Wishard is in Who's Who of America. And I'm sure that he's very popular because he was one of the driving forces behind the first gasoline tax. And of course I'm being facetious.
Right.
I'm sure nobody particularly, what a thing to, you know, that's almost like being the father of a werewolf or something. I don't know, you know, I mean, gas tax being what it is now. But they had a theater and Teresa's got pictures of it, and they performed. Some of the Wishards were on stage and it was like a dinner playhouse. But
so when you were...
I'm wandering way off
No,
the
that's
subject.
okay. When you were in... How long did you stay in Buffalo then, before you...
Well,
you said you...
We stayed, we were probably there 2 years, 3 years, I'm guessing, I don't know. I know that I was in the first grade, and I came home from school one day. I think it was probably in the springtime, I don't know. And it was like a morgue. My dad was sitting in a chair in the living room. My mother was crying. And everything was upset around the place. Well, now if you go by my mom, who obviously didn't care much for my dad, and with good reason, before he deserted us, she said, and I tend to believe the story, that he'd been dipping in the till at work. Some of the things he repossessed evidently didn't make it all the way back to the finance company. And we literally left within a 24-hour period. I don't remember much about it. It was all confusion and what have you. We had to take a train or a bus, more than likely a bus. I've made those bus trips back to Iowa from there to see my grandfolks before that. And it was the cheapest way of travel, but we left in such a hurry that they didn't even take their clothes or what have you. Whatever toys I had, the only one I really cared about was an electric train. And they left that with these people, the Spivies. And of course, that train was the nicest thing I ever had at that stage of my life. It was made like the Zephyr or the Rock Island rocket or what have you. But anyway, they left all our stuff with the Spivies, and they didn't reclaim it. And I rather imagine that we were running, and Mom said they were looking for him and looking for him for quite a spell. My dad. Mm-hmm. And we went to Des Moines and moved in with my grandparents, which again wasn't too good for Mom because my grandmother was a tyrant and treated her like a slave. And they had a shotgun house out in Highland Park.
What's a shotgun house?
Well, to me it's just a narrow house. It's a gabled roof and long and skinny, you know what I mean? The old deal, living room, dining room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, a bath, but elongated, and it wasn't a bad house, and I started to, wait a minute, I'm getting this screwed up. Yeah, this is right. Yeah, and my dad started for Firestone as in a small store, satellite store. I don't know what his job was, except that it was probably a credit manager or what have you. And now when you think about it, that's a good hideaway. Mom says somehow they were aware that the legal people were looking for him, but we didn't have a phone or an address or anything else. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of like, I can see, I thought about it in my own imagination, that it was kind of like, hiding out until things cooled down. Well, again, my dad advanced through the system and was given a store in Fort Dodge, Iowa. I went to Nash Elementary School in Des Moines. I think, yeah, it was for the completion of the first grade. And and I'd be going in the second grade, obviously, the next year. I, again, didn't have any friends, except a few kids around the neighborhood. When I say neighborhood, I mean in an expanded area. I'm not trying to put myself as being pitiful, I'm just saying the way it was. I don't remember much about Des Moines because it wasn't, again, my grandmother was all over my mom. My dad was back to his old tricks. And one night, for example, Dwight came up and stayed. He was looking for a job or something. My Uncle Dwight came up and was staying a few days in Des Moines anyway, so he stayed with us, not having money to go anyplace else. And he woke up and my dad was urinating against his wall. He was so smashed that he thought he was in the bathroom in his house. And Dwight heard the noise and said, "Frank," and turned on a light. And he'd peed all over the wall. And he said, "Oh, Frank." And Dwight said the only thing he said was, "Oh, thank goodness I didn't go in my dad's room, my folks' room." So he was doing the same bit. Anyway, he got advanced to, I believe he was the manager of the store in Fort Dodge. It was just a small store in downtown Fort Dodge. We lived, again, we were in Fort Dodge probably longer than any place else we had lived, because I went through, first off, when we got to Fort Dodge, I got set back a year in school.
You were in first grade, so you got kept back in first grade?
I was supposed to go in the second grade, and I started, but I didn't know, as I remember, I didn't know what these kids were doing when they were making all these weird sounds during English class, because I hadn't been taught the vowels.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a word to me today. But I'm an avid reader and that type of thing. But anyway, I got set back. Again, it upset my mother. She felt very bad about that. I didn't particularly care. But they set me back from second grade to first grade in Fort Dodge. We lived in Round Prairie then, area of Fort Dodge. And very shortly we moved to another place where we were on the second floor of I don't know what you would call it. It was an ugly gray stucco house. And before it was over, we probably left 3 or 4. We were there, what would that be? First, second, up to about the 5th grade. And Fort Dodge was better for me in a kid's world. I made a few friends a few blocks from us, because when we stayed at one place for over a year or whatever, it seemed like we were constantly moving. I was constantly changing schools. But it was closer to my grandfolks. Des Moines just Fort Dodge. Des Moines was 60 miles from Afton. But Fort Dodge, of course, is further than that. But we would get down to see my grandfolks at the holidays, and those were always such wonderful times. Christmas was Oh boy, I loved Christmas. Not present-wise. I'm talking about just the peace and the fun. Mom McKinney, Granddad Harmon. And every Christmas, when I was smaller, Mom did I tell you this before? And she would wax all the floors. Yeah. Oh, she was a lot of fun. What a wonderful lady. But anyway, I liked it better in Iowa certainly than I did in Philadelphia or Buffalo. But the same habits were still there, the movement, the upheaval of first days at schools. And
Well, when did you, okay, wait a minute, maybe I missed something. You lived in Fort Dodge, Kansas
No, Fort Dodge, Iowa.
Oh, Fort Dodge, Iowa, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of wandering all over.
No, that's all right. Okay, so
But
you're,
anyway, yeah, go ahead. What were you gonna
so
say?
you stayed in Fort Dodge?
We moved from Buffalo to Des Moines.
And then to Fort
That's
Dodge.
in with my grandfolks, and they were living in rentals, homes. And that was in Highland Park, which is still there in Des Moines, out on, my grandpa's store was on an avenue in the main intersection of Highland Park of 6th and Euclid. I remember that. And then we moved to Fort Dodge. We lived all over. We left my grandparents' home at that time, so we lived with them for a year. And it was tumultuous because of the way everybody got along and so forth.
Did your dad get along with his dad?
No. I don't know who my dad did with, because he wasn't at home most of the time. We did go fishing. Mom made a good friend in Fort Dodge. She ran into this real pretty blonde gal that her maiden name had been Rusk, which is one of the families in Afton. And so the families knew each other and so forth. I don't know how she ran into her. But my dad had the hots for Wanda. And Wanda was somewhat of a party girl. I say that because I don't know, but I walked in my dad during a party when he was in a compromising position with Wanda. And I'd never seen a garter belt before, so I thought that was kind of fascinating.
That was when you were in Fort Dodge?
Yeah.
Okay. How long did you live in Fort Dodge?
For about 4 or 5 years, I guess. Till I was in the
5th grade.
I graduated from the 5th grade because from there we went to, my dad got canned over the same, according to Mom, the same type of situation.
He stole from them?
I think so.
Yeah.
Then we moved, I don't know, that's according to my mom.
Yeah.
I have no proof of that, Vicky.
Right.
My dad was always, nice to me, but he was a stranger. When I say nice, it was like he was visiting us.
Yeah.
He didn't do nothing to me, and during this time, the tension was so heavy between my mom and him. Now, I loved my mom, but you knew her too, of course, and she could be a little bit, she was a feisty little fart. And he would come home drunk, which usually I didn't see because I'd be in bed. But shortly thereafter, I would know he got home, and it might be, we might not have seen him for a few days or what have you. And she would start in because he'd probably have lipstick on his collar or something like that. He's drunk. And I can remember chasing him through the house, yelling at him, and him moving away, just trying to get out of range of her tirades. And he wouldn't. At first, this is a sequence that played itself out over and over again, as I remember. She's behind him saying, didn't you, whatever. He's trying to walk away. All he wants to do, he's smashed and he wants to go to bed, or else he's hungover and he wants to go to bed. And she ends up saying, talk to me or something, and perhaps laying hands on him to jerk him around or slap him in the back or something like that. And I couldn't figure this out because this guy's 6 foot and over. My mom could almost qualify as a dwarf. She's like 9 or 10. He weighs a couple hundred pounds. She weighs, dripping wet, maybe cracks 110 at that time. Very attractive woman. I mean, even my school friends, when they'd see her, say, boy, you got a good looking mom. She looked like an actress. I've heard her compared to Joan Bennett many times. That was Chaplin's squeeze, or but she was a popular actress at the time, and Mom had that beauty, and she was tiny and petite. Well, anyway, he would beat the hell out of her. But I mean, she set up some of these deals. If she just shut up and get away from him when he's drunk, because this guy's got a temper like you wouldn't believe. And
did that happen in front of you?
Well, I was like a spectator to the gladiators or something, because I'd wake up to the racket and immediately go to investigate. And this is the scene I'd see.
And that played out over and over again?
Yeah, many times. And she'd end up with a face that looked like, and she'd tell somebody, you don't know what a stoker is, but everything was cold heated. And if you were fortunate, you rented a house with a stoker in it, because then you could load up the stoker and it would put in the cold mechanically small amount of time or whatever was needed. And at any rate, she'd tell people that she got hit with a shovel while she was loading the stoker or something like that, because her right side or her left side of her face would be, big bruises and cuts and stuff like that. But she would go right back to next time and blow up when he got home. He wouldn't have any money. He'd be bust. I think, I don't know if I put this in there or not the first time, but I thought that bill collectors, and that's what Mom called them, were some kind of transformer monster, or Dracula and Frankenstein or some damn thing. Because this is when we were in Fort Dodge. I remember when we lived in this one house, it must have faced the south, or faced so that the afternoon sun hit the windows anyway. Because she'd say, go hide, here comes a bill collector. Now my dad's working on repossessions, right? And here my mother is running off bill collectors because they haven't been paid. People are probably chasing us from a year or two before that, I don't know. So she'd say, hi, here comes a bill collector. So this one, I can remember this distinctly this one time. And I'd always run and slide under their bed. I didn't have a bedroom at the time, so actually I slept on a couch in what was the living room, dining room in this house. So I slid on my dad's and mom's bed in their back bedroom, but it has a window that faces out to the sun. And these people would come, and she must have smelled them or something. I don't know if she had a periscope or what, but she always seemed to know when they were. Well, once in a while she'd get caught. She'd answer the door, and then she'd have to go into all this palaver and lie, maybe, and promise them things we were never going to keep. But it wasn't my dad fending them off, it was my mom. So anyway, I slid on the bed this one day, and then I looked out. Well, we didn't have any curtains, but we had those old paper shades you pulled down, you know, the kind of spring back and wrap around, you let them move. So anyway, I'm under the bed, and we've got an old shade like that on the window, and it's ripped in various spots. And here's this big shadow out on the window. And the guy's trying to see in these little tears and cracks if anybody's in there. There's two of them. One of them's ringing the front doorbell and trying to get her to answer.
You as a little kid must be scared to death.
Oh, God, I thought, boy, if this guy comes through the window, what am I going to do? But I didn't know if it was a man or, his shadow looked so big out there. Well, there was all kinds of, I think that when I was saying, I was telling you about this is going back now, the Lindbergh helmet, and way back in Buffalo. And I told you about going in a stranger's house with kids, and the search was on. We lived in an area of Buffalo, I do want to tell you this, guy. I was wearing the helmets in the wintertime. In the wintertime, they obviously are very, very cold. I've got a friend, and I guess we were buddies and pretty close, just little guys. And about a block away from our house, wherever we lived, was what had once been a farmhouse. And they built all the way around it, but this one block had nothing in it but this one burnt out house right in the middle of it. And I was told to stay away from there by my parents or by Mom. And of course that made me fascinated with it. It looked like a ghost house or something. So one day my friend and I, in the winter, went over to investigate it. And we were looking through the window, both of us scared that we were going to run into a ghost. And I think we actually had our arms around each other, around on each other's shoulder, trying to bolster the other one up to this adventure we were on. I'd had been about 5 at this time, or maybe 4, a little before that, I don't know. Maybe 6, who knows. Anyway, we fell through the window. And we hit the hard floor like concrete or what have you. And it was a long ways down. It was a kind of a deep basement. So here we are. It's afternoon in the wintertime. The sun's going to go down pretty quick. We both banged ourselves up pretty good. And I cut my scalp and ruined my Lindbergh helmet. I bled in it to where it was sheep lined or fleece line, my helmet with the goggles, and I bled in it till I totally wrecked it. But here we are, the stairs are burned out. There's no way, there's nothing down there been cleaned out or burned out or whatever. and there's nothing down there but rubble and stuff. And there's nothing to build a way back up to get out the window, so we're trapped. And I didn't realize, but our butts would have froze to death down there pretty quick. And the whole neighborhood was out looking for us. This is what I say, I was always getting in crap like this, Vicki, and you were too, so I don't know.
So you're saying it's in our DNA?
Well, anyway, they finally heard us yelping for help, because, I don't know, that would have been the first place I think I looked from where we lived. We lived in a bungalow there. I don't know, I don't think it was too far off the Erie or one of the canals, because the rats used to play like squirrels in our front yard and live under our front porch. You know, let us work. But we didn't, we trap rats
That's
and
disgusting.
kill them. You know, with an orange crate and a stick, and put a little something to eat out there, and then we were just little, but we must have been halfway mean, but we get tired of those vermin. So then we'd punch them with sticks to where we could finally get them into submission and kill them. But anyway, this particular day, they finally heard us squealing and came over and picked us up. So we got out of that one. I remember another time that I got down in a ditch when they were digging up the sewer. I don't know if they were putting in a line or not. It was across the street. And I got down the ditch before I figured out I couldn't get out. You know, I slid down the wall of a ditch. It was for guys to put in the sewer, which was 6 or 8 foot deep.
And you're only 5 years old during this time. And you're
I had a
moving
brand
down?
new pair of shoes on, and it was muddy down there. Or I don't know if they were new. But money wasn't easy to come by, so they were always Buster Brown shoes. And I can remember walking, and one came off in the mud. And by this time I was a little bit frightened because I was by myself. Then the other came off a little later in the mud, and I didn't even bother to pick them up, so I lost my shoes. So when I finally got out, which nobody was looking for me or anything, but I finally wandered down the end of the ditch until I somehow got out. I guess there was access, or a ladder or some damn thing I got out of. But I remember wearing those shoes and getting switched for that. Mom, as she switched me, you went and got a switch. And believe me, a little old bush switch can sure
Hurt?
raise the welts when,
Yeah.
well, anyway. And now back to
So then,
what,
okay,
Fort
so now
Dodge.
we're in Fort Dodge, and you're constantly moving, and
Oh yeah.
And same old
anyway, all they ended up, Snyder was her name. Her maiden name was Rusk, but Snyder was her husband's name, and I know damn well that my dad was always after her. And they'd go fishing together, which was a real opportunity. And I'd get to go on a picnic with them. But I didn't have a fishing pole or nothing, but I mean, you know, I was on my own again when these happened, like any kid would be. I'm not trying to overplay it. Mom would send me down to, our first car was a 1936 Willys that was repossessed for whatever reason by Firestone, or they ended up with it. I don't know how this worked out, or maybe he just knew about it because of it. And this old boy had committed suicide in the back seat of the car. You know, by putting a hose in the car and then keeping it running in the garage. The guy that owned it before. So my dad got a real good deal on it, still stunk a little bit. But it was a good little car. But I was the one riding in the back seat, right?
and you heard the story.
So, Mom would send me to the store. We legged it a lot, Mom and I. We'd go window shopping. I mean, she'd go window shopping. And we probably had, you know, a couple mile walk downtown and stuff like that. Or she'd send me down to meet him on payday. And I knew his hangouts, the taverns, at that time when Iowa was a semi-dry state, nobody served liquor, it was just beer and taverns. Well, they served it, but it wasn't legal. And the state gave which he was always, you could only get so much because they had a liquor book, what they called liquor books. And when you went into a state-run liquor store, why, you give them their book and they kept a record of how much you drank that you bought from the state. Sometimes you got cut off, I think, because I'd hear the old man bitching about it. But Mom would send me down on payday to the taverns that he frequented downtown to bring him home when he still had some dough. Now she might make an excuse and say get a loaf of bread or buy these or that and then go on down and come home with your dad. Which I didn't mind. I knew where he hung out and the people knew me, the old time drinkers and the barmaids and all that. And these are not like bars today. They're the old gin mill variety. And I go in and sit at one of the stools next to him, wasn't paying attention to what they were saying, because these places served hamburgers or meals and that. The young man would usually buy me a hamburger, so I was plenty happy. I was sitting there, I liked hamburgers, so I'd sit there and eat my hamburger, keep saying, we better get home. I called him father. I called my mom mother. I can't even pronounce it. He couldn't either. He had that same lisp. It's hard for us to pronounce THs for some reason. I say mother instead of, I have to think and flip my tongue to say it right. But I called them father and mother up until the time I went to live with my grandfolks later on. And now I look back, it sounded so strange when I started living with them again. I started calling my mom, Mom. But I was, I wasn't going to go around saying father and mother, Well, the old man wasn't there then anyway, but he would, he'd just set me up there, maybe I'd get a bottle of pop, and they'd go on raising hell and drinking for a while. And I'd be there saying, well, I better get home, and all this, and then finally he'd say, okay. I don't know how to say it, but I don't remember him ever laying a hand on me. But it wasn't out of love, it was out of, I always felt like a spectator in this marriage.
Yeah.
Now, Mom was good to me. She took me some places, but I don't know what she was doing with her life because she wasn't around a lot either. She was around much more than my dad, and I saw her every day, yes.
She wasn't working though, was she?
No, Mom didn't work. In those days, for one thing, she had no talents. She'd never worked in her life. She was just a little farm girl going to a business college, sent to a business college by her grandpa, Hammonds. He paid for it. And she was in her first year of business college in Des Moines, learning to be a secretary or something, when my dad and her got together. I don't know how they met or anything else. I know they were married in Ottumwa, Iowa. I don't understand that either, because distances were took a lot more time to move around then. Did you know that during the Second World War that the speed limit on the open highway was 35? You were on it forever. And they enforced it too. But anyway, I go down to pick up the old man one night, or to get him to come home. It's wintertime. So when we leave the bar, it's dark. And like I say, she'd send me to pick up some groceries of some kind, and I got a loaf of bread. We get in that little 36 Willys and we start home. And I'm in the front seat, and the doors, as I remember, open opposite. But it doesn't matter, because anyway, the streets are icy. They probably got an edge or two built up on them over the course of the winter, which is the way it was then. I mean, it's compact snow. It's melted and froze, melted and froze. Okay. My dad's driving like crazy, which is scaring the hell out of me. And he whips a corner, and I got my hand on the doorknob, or on the door handle, because I'm trying to hang on and just tense, you know what I mean? And I got a loaf of bread in because the inside of a Willys is not a big car. It's about the smallest car next to an Austin about that there was. And the door opened. And I guess when he turned the corner, I threw my weight against it and pushed down at the same time. The door opens, and out I go.
Oh, gosh.
And I hit that ice, and yeah, I got bruised up a little bit, and I just slid like a puck across the top of the ice for probably, I don't know how far. It seemed like, it was a long ways. But the funny thing was that this loaf of rainbow bread or whatever in a cellophane wrapper busted, of course, when I squeezed it. And I squeezed it with my left arm. I never let loose of it. And I squeezed my left arm and busted it loose, and you could track me. I was just like fairy tale. Here's this trail of bread. These slices of bread going down the street. But there was headlights around me, there was traffic, and stuff. And the old man, I was wearing a Mackinac, what they called a Mackinac winter jacket, and I didn't even get bunged up bad. I had a few bruises on my back and my butt, and that was one of the times when I said, don't tell Mom, don't mention this to your mom. But I didn't have any of the bread anymore. I didn't bother to stop and pick it up. But there were, anyway, those are just, I could keep you here for hours talking about crap that I did and he did and so forth, little adventures. When we were in Davenport, Mom always told that story because...
Is that where you went after Fort Dodge?
Yeah, Bettendorf. We went to a place called Bettendorf, which is about 9 miles or so north of what I would think of as north of he got canned again at Firestone, and so he went to work for as a credit manager for one of these plumbing manufacturers.
Bettendorf is in Iowa? Iowa?
Yeah. It's right on the Mississippi, or where we were. Well, it's right on the Mississippi too. And we moved in there was a family of fishers, and I wondered about it because I used to watch these, what do you call it, martial arts or whatever they are, fights on TV. And there was a kid by the name of Fisher that was from Bettendorf, and I wondered every time I saw him, he's a tough little shit. Of course, they don't stay long in that sport, and he was on TV quite often. He was a terror, they could bloody him up to where he was all over the place, and he'd come back and win. But anyway, we moved. They were truck farmers, or when I say truck farmers, they had a store, a glassed-in front on the place, like the front porch of their house, only it was glassed in. And he raised crops and sold them right out of the Mr. Fisher had built got a second story on it, so we rented my folks rented the second story. So we were right over their house, they were downstairs, and then they had the store in front in the summertime. And it was a good probably 10 miles out of Bettendorf, a little further north up the Mississippi. And I used to work for him, nickel a bushel picking. I'd follow him when he was plowing up the potatoes and stuff. But of course, every other kid around there did too.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like an egg hunt or something. Everybody running for the next potato. It takes a lot of potatoes to make a nickel.
Mm-hmm.
So, but he was a good guy, and he had his son was about the same age as me. And I remember him as being called or named Pete. So Pete Fisher and I went to the same country school. It was 2 miles from home. We walked it both ways. I won't go into one of those long stories about how tough we had it, but an Iowa blizzard on the Mississippi is you get to school and you'd have a piece of ice in your scarf in front of your mouth.
2 miles is a long ways to walk to school.
Yeah, we thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you're walking, they'd shut down the highway in a good blizzard, and on that river like that, well, anyway, wintertime wasn't much fun. Your inkwells would be you had to pour out your ink. You had a desk with a little inkwell in it for your Palmer method writing and all that. And you had to empty out the inkwells every night. And I don't know what she did with them because they'd freeze and bust the bottles. It was just a little country school. 2 teachers taught 6 grades.
Mm-hmm.
They worked their way down on their, they worked their way from the lowest to the highest. And
How many kids did you have in your class?
hmm?
How many kids? 6th grades, how many kids would that be?
There was 2 rows, probably no more than 8 or 10 seats deep. 2 rows for each grade, as I remember, and the school was getting crowded because you had those fold down, and you might share a desk and a seat with someone else. It had an outhouse, there wasn't any indoor plumbing or anything. And I was in the 6th grade there, which was the top grade, of course, for the school, so we each had to take our turns of getting there a little early and firing up the coal stove, because that was our only heat source. But it was kind of fun there. Not fun at home, same old crap.
Yeah. So he worked as a credit manager at where?
I guess it was for, I want to say Bell, but it isn't Bell. There's another plumbing, Crane.
Okay.
C-R-A-N-E, that was Crane Plumbing, which was a manufacturer. Davenport was a pretty industrial town. They had foundries. It's in what they call the Tri-City area. The Rocky Mountain Arsenal is in the middle of the Mississippi there, and then Moline, Illinois is right across the river.
So when did you go to Davenport from Bettendorf?
How what?
You were in Bettendorf.
I stayed in Bettendorf. When I identify it as Davenport, it's just because that was the closest major city.
Okay, so it was Bettendorf.
And it was kind of, you could take a bus. All you did is go out and flag them down. Or you could try and pocket the money you took your folks out of, or your mom, and hitchhike into town. And once you got into Davenport, they had a ferry that ran an old paddle wheeler, riverboat, and it ran from Davenport to Rock Island, then to Moline, and then back to Rock Island and back to Davenport. And it did that all day. And as I remember, I'd get on it for a nickel and I could ride it all day. But there again, you see, Mom had, I was 6th grade now, so I'm a little better off, but I went any place I wanted to when I was a kid. So I'd go in and ride that ferry when I thought it was kind of cool, you know, the paddle wheeler.
Yeah.
And all day long you could, if you wanted. Mom sent me to the movies, and she'd get a dime someplace. And from the time we hit Fort Dodge through Davenport in the summertime when hay fever season came on, which was about the middle of August, I was miserable. I had asthma and hay fever, bad at that time. And the only place in town that I could get any relief was, we found, it's not a bad deal for a kid, was movies, because they had air conditioning. The only places that had air conditioning then were department stores, large department stores, and the movie houses. And I guess the filter system and filtering the air, I was much better off. It wasn't a con game just to go to the movies. I was health-wise, it gave me some relief. At home, Mom would, all the windows, because it's, you know, they hadn't heard of insulation, I doubt, very much back then in the homes we lived in. And Mom would raise the windows as high as they go and rip up old sheets. We always had enough rags around, and she'd wrap the open window, or she'd wrap the screens in sheets and then, you know, throw water on them or keep them wet. And I'd sleep in a chair, usually overstuffed chair in the living room during hay fever, because I couldn't lay down because I'd get so damn stopped up. And she did that but anyway, back to Bettendorf and the farm. And that was a good place for adventure. And we had a lot of them. There was a bull, I mean a mean bull. They used to, I don't know who owned it, because his dad didn't own the land north of this truck farm we were at. And I can remember that bull chasing us. We used to irritate it. And we loved it so that we took our BB guns and shot it in the balls, you know. And run like the dickens, and no. And then, but there was a creek that came down and emptied into the Mississippi, and probably it was maybe a 2-mile trip to the Mississippi, I don't know, or a mile and a half. And in the wintertime, we always had what they called, it might be in February or not on time, but they call it a January thaw. And you'd hit a hot spell most every winter to where, or spring, whenever the ice broke up. I think you probably heard this story, because we'd go down.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we would spend hours with whatever implements we could find, cutting the shape of boats, putting a bow and stern on a piece of ice and shaping your boat out, and then trying to get it to break loose and this was a pretty lively creek, or I mean, by that, you know, it's got other drainages, I'm sure, upstream draining into it, and it would be called a river out here probably, I don't know. But anyway, we break off those pieces of ice on the edge of open water when the ice broke up, when it got warm enough for that. And then we would pole down to each of us had individual, everybody had their own boat, in quotes. And then we would pole down to where we got within a quarter of a mile of Mississippi, and it started getting deeper. You didn't want to get to beyond the length of your pole. Why then you just pulled it into shore, and you only had about 3/4 of a mile to walk back because it wound around so much in there. So you got a long ride. I was doing that one day with Pete and a bunch of other kids, and I fell in. My boat broke in half and I fell in the creek. So it was cold enough that it was a long walk home. And I got there and my mom, she didn't spank me, switch me or nothing. And I changed into dry clothes and she said, "Now don't you ever do anything that stupid again. You can drown. What if you go out into the Mississippi, you know, and all this and that." And so I swore, you know, that I'd never do it again, and she let me out again. Well, I went down and started watching the other kids do it. And of course they're all saying Wishard's a sissy, Wishard, you know, and mama's boy and all that. So I started making myself boats again with them and doing the same thing over. And I got down the Mississippi and it was deeper than my pole was long, or I got down the creek there. And I had a heck of a time, and I was trying to run across the ice floes and to get back on the shore, because you know and I'm dressed in Mackinac or winter clothing, so I go in that creek, well, I get pretty heavy in a hurry and I can't swim anyway. So I came back wet that time. And I didn't get near the reception. I think it scared my mom the first time. But I remember in those days they'd take like a 5/8 or 3/4 dowel, just a piece of dowel and a piece of wood with a little fleece rag on it, and that's what they waxed the floor with. My mom was so angry, that temper I'm talking about, that she grabbed that, and the dowel unscrewed from the mop head or whatever it was, and she got a hold of that dowel somehow, and I'm naked because I just got my clothes off, my wet clothes off for the second time that day, and she whipped the shit out of me, excuse me, with that dowel. From room to room, because I'm on a dead run, you know, and she's whacking me with that thing. And Dagwood, my wire-haired terrier, my dog, who was always so faithful and loyal to me, he evidently had a few things, an axe to grind with me too, because he took the opportunity to jump up and bite a hole in my belly while I was running around. He got so excited, he thought, well, I guess I'll just join in the act, you know, so my own dog bit me. And that's about the last time I did that. But that was a fun place. On the bend of the creek, there was a great big, I don't know what it was, old oak tree, I guess. And they had probably, I would guess, somewhere around 25, 30 feet of heavy rope strung up in the limb. And it was so that you could take a long run, a real long half-circle run, and you'd go way out over the creek. And these were things that I never got to do in the city, and those kids, you know farm kids.
Always finding something to do.
Yeah, they'll always. We took that bull that we didn't like. It must have been his dad's, because we tempted it with feed. His folks were gone one day. Pete's folks were gone into town, so we tempted that bull in, and they had milk cows. So they had what they call stanchions in the barn, where they stick their head through the 2x4s or whatever they are, and you slam them shut and lock them in because they can't get their head back out, and then they milk them. Well, we, with the help of some feed and some lively footwork, we got that big bull in the barn and got him locked in the stanchion. And they had always had, the place was alive with feral cats. And there was, I don't know, about a half a dozen. They weren't kittens, but they weren't far from it. One of the cats had in the barn there. And there was 4 or 5 of those kittens in the barn. So we'd take them and throw them on the bull's back. And he'd start bucking, and the harder he bucked, the more that cat would dig into its claws in his back, you know. And he tore out this section of stanchion and went out through the barn door and tore the stanchion all apart, and then tore the door and the door jamb all apart when he went out that way. That was our revenge on him for chasing us out of the field. But anyway, we got in a little trouble over that. Or Pete did. He got whopped that time. There were 3 brothers down there, and Pete was the youngest of them, my age. But anyway.
How long did you stay in Bednar?
Oh, 1 year. That's where the old man took off.
Okay.
He left us at that. He mortgaged everything we had. He made loans and forged my mother's name on them. On the papers, you know, he'd take them out of the place, and what I'm saying is, he was Crane canned him again. I don't know what he did there, but Crane canned him in 42, this had to be.
1942?
And he sold every last piece of furniture, including my mom's blue rug that I said she took such pride in. Wherever we moved, we just rolled out that rug, you know, and it was pretty. And a white coffee table. Those are the 2 things that she really. Anyway, he sold them and everything else because he was going to go to California, as I remember. It's wartime, and there's, you know, things are buzzing out on the West Coast. And he figured he'd get a job. I mean, this is a story he put forth. He'd get a job out there, and then he'd send for us. And so this is when I think he left before so we knew he was gone, but we didn't know he'd sold everything. And we didn't know that he'd sold everything about twice, and leaving a bunch of people in dispute, and these loans came due, and they looked up Mom, and she hadn't signed any of the papers. He'd take them out, yeah, I'll get my wife to sign them, bring them back, and he got